Hello, Patriots, and welcome to this week's Patriot Point, the program where you get the news from a Christian, conservative, constitutional, and common sense point of view, things that you do not get on the mainstream media. This week, I was actually going to show you an interview that I conducted with one of our constitutional officers, and we'll have to push that back to another week because we have had some big news happen up there at the Kentucky Capitol. The rest of the media really isn't talking about this, and so we're going to give you the information here. It's probably going to get you way upset, but then I'm going to give you some courses of action on about 2 or 3 things that you can do about it to make a difference. First of all, on July the 6th, just this week, there was a big meeting up there at the Kentucky Capitol with the Legislative Interim Joint Committee on Education. And they were having a special meeting about 2 different bills that have been proposed here in Kentucky, BR 60 and BR 69. Now, these 2 bills would ban critical race theory from being taught in Kentucky schools. Now, before we get into all the hoopla of what happened that day, and there's some big news, let's first of all define what critical race theory is. Critical race theory is defined as critical race is a neo-Marxist ideology that is pervasive in higher education and teaches that a person is defined above all else by race, gender, and sexual orientation, and that America's institutions are designed to ensure white supremacy. So that's by definition what this critical race theory, which I'm probably going to call CRT from now on, that's what it teaches, is that America is inherently racist. Our institutions, it's just racism, everything's racist. So we need to do away with all of our institutions and we need to rebuild America, just scrap all of America, and let's just start over because it's all incredibly racist. You can even look up things on YouTube here. Math is racist somehow. So that's what CRT is. Well, they had a meeting here this past Tuesday up at the Kentucky Capitol saying we're not going to teach that in Kentucky schools and we're going to make a law about it. Well, one of the people who came to testify about this was the commissioner for the Kentucky Department of Education. His name is Dr. Jason Glass. And I want to, before we get into too much of his testimony, I just want to play for you a little of the clips of some of the things he said leading up to this critical race theory potential law.
One of the most important goals in educating our citizens, our students, is for them to ultimately be able to discern for themselves truth and to make decisions about what's right and the best path forward.
You see right here, our first problem. Those who are on the radical left are pushing this idea that truth is whatever you decide that it is. And nothing could be further from the truth. We can discover what the truth is, but the truth is not determined on what you just think that it is. That's our first big problem. But notice what else he goes on to say here.
As an alternative for your consideration, rather than banning CRT or some list of related subjects and concepts, instead, consider enacting a statute that forces those conversations. Through statute, you can force any conversations on CRT, should they take place, to occur in an informed free market of ideas.
You'll notice he says here that critical race theory should be forced to be taught in Kentucky schools. The teachers should be forced to do this. The students should be forced to be hearing this. He goes on to say, well, we'll also talk about the opposite and people who claim critical race theory is bad. Well, here's the problem. You can expose your kid to poison, but you can also give them the antidote. Is that a good idea? Not at all. We should not have our students exposed to this poison. We should not be forcing Kentucky teachers to have to teach this Marxist ideology. Now, Dr. Glass goes on to say, well, it doesn't matter anyway, because in Kentucky schools, even though I think we should force them to be taught this and force our teachers to teach it, we actually don't do that. We do something else called diversion, equity, and inclusion, called DEI, and it's completely different. I'm here about to show you that these two things are exactly the same. And when Dr. Glass or anybody else tells you that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's completely different from critical race theory, there are only two possible options. Either one, they think they are telling you the truth, but they are mistaken. Or number two, they are lying to your face and knowingly doing so. And there's only two options, because I'm going to show you now from the Kentucky Department of Education's own website that everything critical race theory is pushing about how white privilege and whites are all racist, whether you know it or not. And if you're not white, then you're oppressed, whether you know it or not. All of that is included in this diversity, equity, and inclusion. So they've got that at the core of this. Now, what they've done to try to disguise it is they've added in other things as well, saying, well, hey, this is going to help kids who are poor to be able to get lunches. And this is going to help kids who are maybe in a wheelchair be able to have access to everything going on at the school. And they've added all of these nicety things, which are good, on top of it. But when you get to the core of it, at the root of it, in the heart, it is critical race theory. As they said on Sesame Street, they used to say, things which are the same are not different. And that's exactly what it is. So now let's look at the Kentucky Department of Education's own website proving that critical race theory and this diversity, equity, inclusion is exactly the same thing. Let's take a look. First of all, if you go to the Kentucky Department of Education's website and you type in DEI, you scroll down, it'll talk about the diversity, equity, and inclusion. And they have a little PowerPoint briefing that they have prepared. Here's the first slide. It's called Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Our Schools. Well, as you go through this thing, you're going to notice a few important factors. I want to point out just a few of them as we begin. And again, these are their slides. I didn't make any of these things. Notice what it says here at the beginning. Race, stress, and trauma. Conversations about racial trauma. You know what that is? That is teaching people you are a victim. Even though you may not have been victimized, you never realized it before now, you are an oppressed victim. It goes on to talk about implicit bias. You are born being racist. In this committee meeting held on Tuesday, we had representatives that had testimony saying, listen, we have kids in kindergarten and the second grade are being taught in kindergarten that they are oppressors. That is poison to teach to our kids. Let's notice some of the other slides they have here. First of all, notice at the bottom left what they have on the rest of these slides. Team Kentucky. Why is Andy Beshear's campaign motto there? Why is that on all of these slides? Can you imagine what would have happened if that had had Governor Bevin's little slogan and motto, his logo on that? Remember, he had a little bell because he owned a company that made bells. Well, the liberals would be going crazy over this. But here you have Andy Beshear's, his own little slogan here, his logo on all of these slides. Incredibly inappropriate. Let's go on to another one. It talks about the unconscious bias training. We have to train people that, hey, you're racist. You don't even think about being racist. You don't say anything, do anything, but you're actually racist. It's completely unconscious. I don't believe that. That is poison, and they are teaching it to our teachers and to our students. Notice this other slide. It it says here, to help us examine our privilege and implicit biases, all about this white privilege. Well, you know what? There's a whole lot of white people who never grew up in history having any privilege whatsoever. White kids had to pick cotton in the olden days as well. And did you know that there's something in America that happened, which was white slavery? A lot of people have forgot this. There's a book here I'm showing you, White Cargo, The Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America. Same thing, bought and sold like property. It was wrong for every single person. And yet this is something, but you're supposed to have ultimate privilege and always existed. Look at this slide. This ought to make you angry. Here it's at the end of their slide presentation. It says it's up to all of us to advance equity, racial justice in Kentucky schools. And we see all of these people there with their raised right fist. This is the symbol of communism, of Marxism. Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto. You'll see here's Vladimir Lenin, who led the communist revolution over there in Russia, the raised right fist. Here's talking about the Russian Revolution with a raised fist. That is the slogan for, again, communism. Here you see people protesting. They got a socialism shirt. They got another shirt that says fight capitalism. And this is all what they want to teach in Kentucky schools. Here you see a slide called Race-Based Stress and Trauma, and it says, in June, guidance on how districts can facilitate conversations about race-based stress and trauma was prepared by the Kentucky Department of Education. Well, let's look at some of those things that they're referring to in this slide. Here you'll see this is a document prepared by the Kentucky Department of Education, guidance on how districts can facilitate conversations about stress and trauma, the very thing they were talking about. And notice they have here this link that you can go to called Courageous Conversations About Race Protocol. Well, if you go to that document and follow the link, you will find this 2-page document. I want to point out a few things in this document. It says what the teachers are supposed to do. First of all, you are to isolate race. It is the intent of these conditions that, hey, first of all, you've got to separate everybody by race. That's what the Nazis did. All right. Notice what else it says. It says we're going to have to teach that there is whiteness, which they define whiteness as the component of each and every one of ourselves to expect assimilation to the dominant culture. So we're just going to say, if you've got this bad trait, that's a trait of white people. If you would put that's a trait of black people on there, well, people be screaming racism. If you can ever change the word white for the word black and all of a sudden it becomes racist, then it's been racist all along. This is what the Kentucky Department of Education is teaching. This is critical race theory. They have simply renamed it diversity, inclusion, equity, and inclusion. Let's go on. In their little document that they prepared here, that says the Kentucky Department of Education believes that conversations about racial trauma and implicit bias are needed. They're like, listen, you are a victim or you are an oppressor, whether you know it or not. That is critical race theory renamed only. Notice what else they have on the end of page 1 of this document. They says, begin efforts to implement an anti-racism framework. Well, if you click on this little link, this is the document that it shows you. For the sake of time, we're not going to read every little thing here. You see they got it in bullet points. Let's just read just a few, just to show you what they are preparing. It says, 1, this is word for word what it says, redefines and rebuilds all relationships and activities in society based on anti-racist commitments. Now, remember, what is critical race theory? It is saying we need to do away with all of America's institutions and we need to completely set in a new set of them based on what we say is anti-racist, which in fact is nothing but pure racism. Notice what else it says. Commits to processes of intentional institutional restructuring based on anti-racist analysis and identity. So they're like, it is institutionalized racism. I am here to say that I believe institutionalized racism has been removed from the United States for decades now. It wasn't right then, and it doesn't exist now. And to challenge that, I would like those on the left to show me one law in our entire state that says white people are allowed to do this, but anybody else is not. It says institutional structures and culture maintain white power and privilege still intact and relatively untouched. It's just like the civil rights movement never happened, the liberation of the slaves, that never happened. There's still all this white power, white privilege. I encourage you to go through the ultra poor parts of Kentucky's Appalachian Mountains and tell me about all the white privilege going on there and all the white power. Notice what else it says. We need a new consciousness of institutionalized white power and privilege. Does that sound exactly like what critical race theory is? That is precisely what it is. They have simply relabeled it diversity, equity, and inclusion to make it sound nice. This is their document. This is prepared by the Kentucky Department of Education. This is what they are pushing, they want to literally force our teachers to teach this and force the kids to be taught it. It goes on to say, continues to intentionally maintain white power and privilege through its formal policies and practices. Again, preaching this false doctrine that there's white power and privilege, and it's in formal policies and practices. Again, I challenge anybody on the left, show me some formal policy anywhere in our entire state that says white people are allowed to do this and nobody else is. They are pushing lies and racial divides. They are pushing pure racism. Notice what else it says in this document on page 2. It says we need to learn about and acknowledge our own biases. It goes on to say your implicit biases. You've been born with this. You are naturally a racist, oppressive person. This is absolute poison. It should never be taught. And the ultra-radical left are wanting to force our students to hear it. They're wanting to force our teachers to teach it. And we need to protect them from it. The commissioner for the Department of Education says, we're not teaching critical race theory. We're teaching diversity, equity, and inclusion. Well, I just read you and you saw with your own eyes what is actually diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is absolute critical race theory. It is itself extremely racist. So this is a terrible thing going on, and they're trying to deceive people by simply giving it a different name. And what is the biblical standpoint on this? Well, in the book of Romans, chapter number 16 and verse number 17, it warns the Christian about people like this. It says, mark them who are causing divisions among you and avoid them. This critical race theory, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is causing division. We need to separate ourselves from that. It is destructive to Kentucky. Now, let me tell you what we can do about this, is we just need to go on and do what some Kentuckians have done in the past. Let me tell you a little bit of a story. In the year 1947, there was a man by the name of Jackie Robinson, and he was the very first professional black baseball player that was in Major League Baseball. And he was going to try out for the shortstop position. Well, the shortstop position was the guy named Pee Wee Reese had that, a white guy, and he was the captain of the team. And the people who owned the Dodgers there, they said, listen, Reese, if you don't want this guy to have the job, then we won't even put him on the team. He says, no, he did a better job than I did trying out. He can be on the team. So Jackie Robinson got on the team. And then one day they were playing an away game over in, I believe, Cincinnati. And as what happens if you play ball long enough, the ball went over to Jackie Robinson and he made an error in the play. Well, what happened is the stands, the people started booing him and throwing trash at him by the thousands in that stadium. Now, keep in mind, you can imagine what things are being yelled at him and the words that are being used at this point in 1947. It would have been so easy for him to get up and to walk off of that field. And if he would have done that, it would have been the end of black people playing professional sports probably for years and years to come. So what happened? Right when he said he was on the verge of walking off of the field, Pee Wee Reese, who, by the way, is from Ekron, Kentucky. Pee Wee Reese, the Kentuckian, walks out in the middle of that field with thousands of people booing and shouting things at Jackie Robinson. And that Kentuckian stops and puts his arm around Jackie Robinson, and he just stares down thousands of people. And what happens is the crowd began to quiet, and in shame, they silenced their voices. And then Robinson and Reese walk off the field. Jackie Robinson was quoted later as saying, at that moment, Pee Wee Reese saved my career. And if you are to go to the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame today, you will find out front of that museum is a statue of Robinson and Reese. That is how you stop racism. That is what we need taught in Kentucky schools. You stand by somebody, not this racist philosophy which is being pushed through critical race theory, which has just been relabeled diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, here are 3 things that I need you to do about this, Patriots. Kentucky needs you to do this to keep this poison out of our state. First of all, Kentucky needs you to flood all of your county school board meetings. And I can tell you right now what you're going to hear is like, first of all, you're going to hear we should teach critical race theory, or we don't teach that, we teach diversity, equity, and inclusion. You have now been shown that those 2 things are in fact the same thing. And they'll tell you about, oh, it helps kids with lunches and it helps disabled kids. And while those things are good, it also teaches this Marxist philosophy. You need to flood those county school board meetings with patriots who are willing to defend our students and defend our teachers. Because the teachers who don't want to have to teach this poison and this Marxist ideology, they are being pressured immensely to do this. And if they stand up and push back against it, they're going to be harassed, they're going to be pressured. I don't know, they might even lose their jobs. So somebody has to protect Kentucky teachers, and that's going to be up to you, Patriots. So first of all, you need to flood these school board meetings in your county. Number 2, you need to contact your legislators up there at the state capitol in Frankfort. Contact your senator, contact your representative, and say, listen, I'm for this. I want you to be for it. Since the 2 bills to keep this out of our state are bills from the House of Representatives, you could ask your representative to be a co-sponsor of BR 60 or BR 69. If they're really for it, they'll put their name on it and be a co-sponsor, and that's the way to prove they will really be for it. And the third thing I need you to do, Kentucky needs you to do, is we need you to run for positions on your county school board. Let's replace those who are going to poison our students, who are going to not defend our teachers. Let's replace anybody like that with a true patriot. Take it upon yourself to say, this is the way that I will defend my country, I will defend my state, and in my opinion, the best state in the union. So that's something that we've got going on, some big news. What it really is, it's the same thing with a different name and what you can do about it. Well, until next week, I'm Lee Watts for Patriot Point. And remember, liberty is not a spectator sport.